So what about these economists who won the Nobel Prize in economics, say that people are non-rational, like in game theory?
Perfect. Or behavioral economics. Yeah, this I think is the perfect example of we know that human beings don't behave in a rational way, but still we teach it. And the way we do it in economics, and I think this is sort of also interesting, we teach for 3 years mainstream, and then as a paradox, or alternative school, we talk about, for example, gifts. Yeah, this is a big topic of behavioral economics. Gift is a conundrum to economics. It's a paradox. It so happens that gift is a paradox only for economists. To a normal person, giving gifts is no paradox. It just happens. It's only a paradox to somebody like me who was trained for 3 years to teach that human beings shouldn't give gifts. That they should, in fact, it's more rational to give money to, but we don't. So how is this possible? How come human beings? Because it doesn't really fit our models. But giving gifts is not the paradox. The paradox are the models. But this is sort of hard to realize when you've been trained this many years. So my answer to this question is myths are not disputed by facts. Myths are only disputed by other myths. You can have, and this is a perfect example, we have a myth. And by the way, the word myth doesn't have a negative connotation for me. Story, a belief system, something that we hope to be true. And in economics, we hope this to be true. You cannot exchange the founding myth just because facts don't work. In other words, the Greeks, they didn't really believe that there's a chariot carrying the sun from the morning till the evening, but they simply had no better explanation. Same like we have it today. We know that human beings are not rational, but we don't have a better explanation. So yes, the chariot actually, when you ask, does carry the sun. Again, myth is something that never happened, but is happening always. A good example of this is the way we talk about sunrise and sunset. The word sunrise comes from geocentric model of the universe, because the Earth and the sun rises. But we know very well that it's the other way around. So the sun doesn't really rise. The Earth, how should I say? We should say the Earth sort of tilts in the morning way, but the sun does not rise. And yet we still, how do you say it in Polish? How do you say east in Polish? No, see? And west? Západ. So you have it like in Czech. Západ slunce. But but it doesn't, but the myth carries on. So we know very well.
Until Copernicus.
Yeah, but we still.
What about economics? Maybe also this myth is until.
Yeah, exactly. But this is even with this wording, we know it doesn't set, but we still use the word it sets. That's my point. It's sort of a setrvačnost. It's sort of a inertia of the belief. For example, also we know gravity is really not Newtonian gravity is not really how the world works because of Einstein, but we still sort of use it because it's convenient. But in economics, it's worse because we haven't had Copernicus yet. Or maybe a little bit in Keynes, little bit, with his idea of animal spirits. This is a practical example. I just had this debate in Hamburg 3 weeks ago. I was talking with people who model these behavior of markets, stock markets, and I said, wait a minute. When you say the price of gold is overvalued, you are saying really much more than just what you say, because you are really saying that the price of gold is overvalued. In other words, the value of gold is here, but the price of gold is here. So, in this, you claim many things. First of all, you claim that you know the true value of things. That's a very, very bold claim. Secondly, you know this, something that the market doesn't know. You have some sort of secret eyes into the true ontological essence of things. Thirdly, this has been given to you by some model that you've created, or maybe you do it from coffee. And most importantly, you're saying the markets are wrong. This is ironic because this statement you can hear every day in radio, TV, usually by people who believe in rational markets. Why? Because they model them. So in one sentence you're saying, I have a model that models rational behavior of the markets, and in the same sentence you're saying the markets are irrational because they are overshooting or undershooting the value constantly. This you cannot say. So I was asking them, well, the markets are irrational, each one of them, animal spirits, sentiments, and making even jokes out of it. I say, okay, so you agree, how can you then model it if it's irrational? Because the very definition of irrational is it is not rational. It is not mathematical. It is not behaving according to laws if it's irrational. Irrational people behave irrationally. You cannot predict their behavior. So that's another example of on one hand, we know that it's irrational, but on the other hand, we also know that it's rational. And both of it cannot be together. So until we have another completely different myth that we'll be able to, or story, or model, however you want to call it, to replace the existing myth, we will still keep believing in things in which we know we shouldn't believe. This is like, I don't know, with Christianity, or atheism, or any other belief that you have. You have many objections towards whatever you believe, but you still believe it.
It sounds like the wisdom of Proverbs.
Yeah.
You have Proverbs for every situation.
Precisely. This I think is the first postmodern text. It is not wrong to build, it is not wrong to destroy. The only difference is there's time. There is time for every purpose under heaven. So what the Ecclesiastes is really saying is there is no absolute good and evil, only the time makes it good or evil. It is time to sow, it is time to reap. It is time to make love, it is time to kill. None of it is good or bad, it's just the determinant there is time. That's a very postmodern way of thinking, but that's a great point with Ecclesiastes. Yes, please.
Maybe the problem is connected with the definition of utility, because I think that maybe wider this, it could be more, closer to truth. Like, for example, with this giving gifts example. Now, if I give a gift, it's not rational for my wealth, but it could be rational for my pleasure, or my position in society, or something like this.
That's exactly the problem. If you define utility too broadly to include everything, you end up with tautology. So, for example, to do a very simple, stupid Popperian example of a test of a theory is falsification. So give me an example, how could I possibly, in my imagination, falsify the homo economicus maximization theorem? Okay, for example, let's imagine I give away all my money. Am I an egoist? Yes, of course, because I increased my utility, because my utility was to not have any money. If I sacrifice myself for mankind, Jesus in that case was also egoist because it brought him increased utility. because he in fact cared more for others than for himself. So there you kind of end up, okay, so altruists are also egoists because it's for an altruist, it increases utility to create goodness for others and harm themselves. So that, if you define it narrowly, then it is a scientific sentence. Let's say utility in terms of material wealth. If I define that, then it's a scientific sentence, but obviously it only is true 60% of the time. And we don't know which 60. And it's not really a very nice theory if you say, well, this is an absolute truth, which only works 60% of the time. There's this beautiful sentence by somebody who said, I know that 80% of the money that I give to PR companies and to advertisement is wasted, but I don't know which 80. So you keep doing it. So that's one point. Secondly, you said a very interesting thing. You said there is another rationality outside of rationality. And that's exactly the problem of economics. What sort of rationality will you employ? So either there's a rationality of me trying to gain, or there's a rationality of me trying to maybe increase the utility of my family or of my country or of the whole world. But these rationalities are completely different, and sometimes they are in complete conflict. So there we say there are different logics. You can see this also in theoretical physics, that the logic that governs the behavior of subquantum particles is completely against everyday logic. There, particles travel against time. There is an imaginary time that often very goes backwards. Thing can be a wave and a particle at the same time. That doesn't really make sense. And it doesn't. But on some level of logic, so we can get philosophically to, what's logical about logic. And more, even if I may, one sort of way of looking at this is I could even claim that economics is in fact an altruistic science or field. Why? Let's start with the very beginning, Adam Smith and the famous butcher example. This all of you. Adam Smith says, it is not from the benevolence of the butcher that I have my meat, but because of his self-love. And him, by following his self-love, really increases the utility of the whole. This is sort of the invisible hand of the market and self-utility principle connected. This is actually, have you ever stopped to think about it? Why did Adam Smith say the second part of the sentence? He says, it is good for the whole. Well, if we're egoists, why should we care for the whole? Why didn't he just say, well, the butcher just gives me meat because it's good for him, period. Whoops. Because it's good for him. And he's an egoist and he doesn't care for the whole. No. And this is, again, you hear this in the media every day. It is better for the whole for us to be egoistic. So in a way, this poor butcher wants to be an egoist, but damn it, I did it again. I was altruist. I couldn't help it. And this, in fact, is the principle of the invisible hand of the market. No matter how sinister or evil or egoist you try to do, you are increasing the utility of the whole. So in a way, all our argumentation or our logic is really appealing to the altruist side. Growth is good. This is I love this because this is sort of an argumentation that you hear especially from the extreme, right? We need growth. Why? Well, for the poor. Oh, okay. So suddenly the poor are important, yeah? Yeah. Otherwise, the poor would suffer. Okay. We need to grow because of China and because of Africa. We need to pull the whole world out. And so, they're not, if a true right-winger should say, we have to grow because we want to be richer. Period. No need to put altruism into that sentence because you don't believe in altruism. This would be an answer to Ayn Rand or Spencer, more appropriately. The rules of the jungle, the survival of the fittest, again, it's good for the whole. The best win. How? And this is another example of tautology. Well, how can you know which one is the best until he becomes the best? Okay, so you have two companies, A and B. Which one is the best? We don't know. Let the market decide. and the market decides for A, and then that makes it always the best. And that's, of course, and if the B wins, B was the best. A true way to how to test this hypothesis would to have some sort of an outside measure to say, well, A is really better than B, and now let's see if market selects A. That would be the proper way of testing the hypothesis, whether market selects the better or not. But it's again down in its tautological way. The best is not selected because it was best, but the other way around, if you see the tautology there. Yeah. Thank you, that's a great question. Okay, beer time.
I would like to ask you, I didn't mention it when we met outside, but could you explain more, how do you cope in the business world? Because as we know, you work for a bank as a chief global strategist, yes?
Chief macro strategist, not global, it's be at least 40.
And you write about all these things, about the fallibility of mathematics and economics, and how do you cope to do business knowing that it's that it doesn't work as it should, that the banking and the work of an economist shouldn't be so like it like you would like to be.
Yeah, no, precisely. I don't think I would do a world a better service if I became a monk, living in a desert or in a cave, eating, dried cockroaches and saying these things. I think the system has to be changed or criticized or from within. And that's exactly the position from which I want to do it. These things that I'm saying, many people have said exactly in the position of a monk. But that really didn't lead us, in a way, anywhere. So I think exactly I have to be in the middle of the system to see that. Let me give an example, for example, interest rate. Yeah, this is the whole idea, the key idea of banking. And my bank actually likes it this way. Because they know, everybody who has a little bit of brain in between their ears knows that the system, the way it is not sustainable. And something needs to be done. Even the very topic of Davos was always the sort of the masturbation place for capitalism. Even today, I mean, this year the topic was the great transformation. Looking for new models. In other words, if you read this religiously, repentance. In Greek, it means metanoia, looking for new ways, changing the ways, looking for new models. We somehow did something wrong, we believed the wrong thing, now we need to change it, and it's better that we do the change than somebody else from the outside. That's sort of a utilitarian way of looking at it. But let's focus on interest rate. Throughout the history of mankind, it doesn't really matter what culture you look in. Old Testament, Holy Quran, Vedas, Hammurabi Code, Aristotle. Don't know about Confucius, I'm still reading him, but there I haven't found anything yet. But otherwise, in most of the founding culture of the West, there is this sentence, do not use interest rate, and if so, minimize the usage of interest rate. For some reason that it's quite difficult for us to understand. In the Bible, it simply says, don't give loans to your brother at an interest, period. Doesn't really argue why not. Aristotle argues a little bit in the book of Politics, this is why you shouldn't do it, da-da-da-da-da. Now, I don't want to go into the details, but he gives some reasons there. Today, we have made interest rate, fast forward 4,000 years. Today, we've made interest rate a founding pillar, if you will, of our system, especially of banking. but other systems as well. The whole idea of public finance, I mean, is also quite impossible for you, I think, to imagine, and me, our lives without interest rate, etc. It allows us to drive in cars that aren't ours. It allows us to live in houses that are not ours. This is called mortgage, etc., etc. So it's a great tool, but the problem is we don't know how to use it. My essential problem here is that we cannot, and I'm coming back to mathematics, we cannot calculate interest rate. I mean, sorry, we can calculate it, but we can calculate it very exactly, which doesn't mean we know, which doesn't mean we know what it is. Stupid example, if we could calculate interest rate for Greece properly, there wouldn't be a problem. Because, oh my God, I mean, we've been lending for 100 years to hundreds of different countries. Suddenly one of them goes bankrupt. Yeah, this is why we have our risk models for. This is why we have risk premium for. This is why we have credit default. This was the idea of credit default swaps. I insure. So the story goes, I, as, I don't know, bank or a financial institution, lend money to you as a Greek government, knowing perfectly well that the risk up against me, is that you will go bankrupt and that you will not pay me the money because Greece cannot run away. So the only option there is you'll go bankrupt. This is the risk that I'm taking upon myself, and this is what I'm getting the money for. I mean, in every stupid economic textbook, this is the trade-off. I get whatever risk premium of, let's say, just 2% or 1% because I am actually faced up with the risk. But when this risk actually materializes, the whole thing crumbles. So it's like a car with an airbag that works always except for car crashes. But otherwise, it's always absolutely to the millimeter functional. Everything is calculated. You don't have to worry. But it doesn't work when you crash it. It's like an umbrella that's always good except for when it rains. But carry it with you just in case. But it's a little bit, you know, it doesn't stop the water. That's the problem. We think we understand it. And again, I have nothing against interest rate. That's why I can work in a bank. My problem is if you use a tool that you don't understand to trigger happily. I know that when I'm dealing with a knife, that it's sharp, that it's dangerous. And that's what interest rates are. It's very sharp, it's very dangerous, and it can lead to bankruptcies of the system. So what we've done is, because exactly these mathematical models did not decrease probability, they made it look like, uncertainty. It made it look like uncertainty doesn't exist. So this is the way it worked. I made a safe deal with you. I lend you money, and I insure the money by a credit default swap with an insurance company. So I have zero risk, because if you go default, you pay it to me. So I'm getting free 1% a year. So it looks like an absolutely bulletproof, risk-free deal. What in fact happened in my thesis is that we've exported the uncertainty into the system. That's why the whole system is crumbling down. Because the uncertainties were stuck in the cracks of specialization of the system. So when you go bankrupt, the worry is not about me and you, the worry is about the system. When you're driving a car that you don't understand, let's imagine you have a car in which the brake and the gas swaps randomly. Okay? How would you drive such a car? Yeah, it's a dangerous car, but you want to drive. It's also quite useful, but sometimes it just swaps according to some algorithm or completely chaotically. How would you drive such a car?
Be ready.
Very slowly, and be ready that, you know, once it adds and once it stops. So you would drive it very, very carefully. We took a car like this and we drove it like mad. You know, there's this beautiful song by Jethro Tull, by Aerosmith, sorry, Living at the Edge. You know, and if you live on the edge for too long, you mustn't be surprised when that edge cuts you. Because the probabilities are both-sided. It's like when you ski. I don't know how many of you ski. It's a sort of a very typical Czech pastime hobby. The best way how to ski is on the inside of the inside leg on the edge. But there, of course, you're much more vulnerable because most people ski have most of their weight on the outside leg, because if there is some uncertainty on the surface, they can always use the second leg to balance it. But when you have your weight here, there is nothing to break your fall if the surface, for example, changes a little bit. So it drives much faster, and you can do a better curve, but it's also very volatile to fall. And that's what we've edged it, and we were surprised when we fell off that edge. Yeah.
What do you think about Islamic bank? There is no interest rate.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good question. It's a question that I often get, and it's a completely different model of banking. It's much more participatory, because what they do is they sort of kind of venture, buy a sort of a stock, maybe. That's, I think, the easiest way how to describe it to us. And they, so also those banks will never be able to be so impersonal like ours. So they sort of co-project it with you. Which results in much more stability and much less growth, which I think in a way is exactly what we should need. And also what it cannot do, it cannot really drive this money multiplicator as much as the way our European banks are made. You know that banks are also participating in money creation process, because they lend out 100 zloty many times. Whereas in this case, it's not that easy. So it makes the system more robust, but also slower, which I think is, to me as an economist, working at the bank, working for the government, my first responsibility is not to go bankrupt for my country, for Europe, and for my bank. You know, Friedman also famously said that the role of a company is to only concentrate on profit, not to do anything else. This is the task of a company. Yeah, okay, but if you grow and create all this sort of social good, and then in one day you go bankrupt, you may quite well destroy all the good that you've been creating for 12 years, and, you know, bailing out and actually getting people unemployed, or maybe even destroying the local competition or the local environment. You can end up creating more evil than good that you did for the 12 years. So I'm not sure about exactly the Islamic way of banking, but I think it could serve as a huge inspiration. But what we definitely need is a slower usage of interest rate, if at all, and more careful handling with knives that we can't really handle, because we cannot. We've kind of learned this, but still we are calculating. We were calculating credit default swaps, even though we knew this was interesting before the Greek bailout. I mean, the forgiveness of Greek debts. There was this huge debate whether we should even, if you remember, there was the sentence in every press release, this must have hit your eyes, that the write-off is voluntary. In every single mention, the word voluntary was there. Why? Because if it wouldn't be voluntary, it would technically qualify as bankruptcy, and the whole mechanism of credit default swaps would be started, and we were afraid that it would collapse. So again, it was insurance that worked always, except when there was actually a problem.